There was a time when loneliness felt like a problem, something you tried to fix, something you were slightly ashamed of, something temporary. Now it feels curated, packaged, aesthetic, almost comforting. Not because it is comforting, but because it's familiar. And familiarity is one of the most addictive things in the world. Somewhere along the way, we stopped trying to escape loneliness and started building identities around it. Before the internet became what it is now, loneliness lived in silence. It existed in empty rooms, in long bus rides, in staring at ceilings at 2 in the morning. It didn't have a soundtrack, it didn't have a filter, it didn't have an audience, and maybe that's what made it so unbearable. Because when something has no narrative, you're forced to feel it fully. But now loneliness doesn't just exist, it performs. You don't just feel alone anymore, you express it, you post it, you aestheticize it. You turn it into something that can be seen, understood, and most importantly, validated. And that changes everything. Scroll for a few minutes and you'll see it. Dim lighting, rain against windows, someone sitting alone with headphones, soft music layered over quiet sadness. Captions saying things like, "I kinda like being alone," or "No one understands me anyway," or "It's peaceful here." And the strange part is, it feels good to watch, because it doesn't just show loneliness, it reframes it. It turns it into something poetic, something meaningful, something almost beautiful. But when you make something look beautiful long enough, you stop questioning whether it's hurting you. Loneliness becomes less like a wound and more like a lifestyle. Humans build identity from repetition. What you feel often, what you think about often, what you express often eventually becomes who you believe you are. So if every day you're consuming content that tells you you're different, you're misunderstood, you're better off alone, at some point you stop seeing loneliness as a state and start seeing it as a trait. You start saying things like, "I'm just a loner," or "I don't really need people," or "I prefer being by myself." And sometimes that's true, but a lot of the time it isn't preference, it's adaptation. It's a quiet negotiation between what you wanted and what you slowly accepted you might never have. There's a specific kind of comfort that isn't actually comfort. It's the absence of risk. When you're alone, you don't get rejected. You don't get misunderstood. You don't get replaced. You don't get disappointed. But you also don't get seen. You don't get chosen. You don't get challenged. You don't get loved. And the longer you stay in that space, the more your brain starts to associate safety with isolation. So even when connection becomes possible, it feels wrong. Too loud, too unpredictable, too risky. And suddenly loneliness isn't something you're stuck in, it's something you're protecting. The internet doesn't just reflect who you are, it reinforces it. If you watch one video about being alone, you'll get 10 more. If you engage with content about isolation, you'll be surrounded by it. Not because it's good for you, but because it keeps you watching. And the more you watch, the more it feels like truth. Because when you hear the same message from 1,000 different voices, it stops feeling like content and starts feeling like reality. You start believing that you don't need anyone, that people are fake, that it's better this way, and slowly your world shrinks, not physically but psychologically. There's something seductive about sadness, not the raw kind, not the kind that keeps you awake at night, but the edited version, the version with music behind it, the version that makes it feel meaningful, because meaning makes pain easier to carry. If you can convince yourself that your loneliness makes you deeper, that your isolation makes you different, that your pain makes you special, then suddenly you don't have to let it go. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because growth usually requires discomfort, but when discomfort becomes your identity, growth starts to feel like loss. We didn't just normalize loneliness, we built systems to replace connection, endless content, parasocial relationships, comment sections that feel like conversations. You can watch someone talk for hours and feel like you know them, but they don't know you. And your brain doesn't fully register the difference, so it gives you just enough social stimulation to keep you from seeking the real thing. Not satisfied, but sedated. At some point, you stop feeling intensely lonely, not because it went away, but because you adapted. You become neutral, flat, detached, and this is where it becomes hardest to escape, because pain motivates change, but numbness convinces you everything is fine. You're not hurting enough to leave, but you're not fulfilled enough to stay, so you exist in this middle space, scrolling, consuming, relating, repeating. Loneliness also gives you something else. Control. You decide when to engage, when to withdraw, when to disappear. No one can abandon you if you're already gone. No one can hurt you if you never let them get close. And that control feels powerful, especially if you've been hurt before. But control has a cost, because the same walls that protect you also isolate you. And over time, those walls stop feeling like protection and start feeling like reality. The truth is humans aren't built for isolation. No matter how much we try to intellectualize it, no matter how much we romanticize it, there's a part of you that still wants to be seen, a part of you that still wants to be understood without having to explain everything, a part of you that still wants connection that isn't filtered through a screen, and you can ignore that part for a while. You can distract it, you can numb it, but it doesn't disappear, it just gets quieter. The internet didn't create loneliness, but it reshaped it. It gave it language. It gave it imagery. It gave it a sense of identity. And in doing that, it made it easier to live with but harder to escape. Because when something becomes part of who you are, letting it go doesn't feel like healing. It feels like losing a piece of yourself. So the question isn't just why are you lonely? The question is, have you started to believe that this is who you are? Because if you have, then the idea of change isn't just uncomfortable, it's threatening. It means opening yourself up again, risking rejection again, stepping into uncertainty again. And after a while that feels harder than staying where you are. But staying has a cost too. A quiet one. The kind that builds slowly over time. Days that blur together. Conversations that never happen. Connections that never form. A life that feels safe but small. And maybe that's the trade you've been making without realizing it. Trading depth for predictability. Trading connection for control. Trading growth for comfort. The problem is comfort doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means you've gotten used to something that's slowly draining you. So the real question is this. If loneliness wasn't aesthetic, if it wasn't validated, if it wasn't constantly reflected back to you, would you still choose it? Or would you finally start trying to leave it behind? Because underneath all of this, beneath the identity, beneath the habits, beneath the content you consume, and the stories you tell yourself, there is still a version of you that doesn't want to be alone. And maybe it's quieter now. Maybe it's been ignored for a long time, but it's still there, waiting for you to stop romanticizing the emptiness and start questioning it.